All right. Thank you so much. That was terrific. And we have just a couple more panels this afternoon. And the next one is one everyone's going to get really excited about, I think, because this is about how do you really make projects happen. And you have Dr. Gyuk's topic about energy storage projects that pay for themselves. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about that. But it's not my job to introduce him. I'm just going to introduce Ken Smith. Come on up, Ken Smith. Ken Smith is the CEO of Evergreen Energy and District Energy St. Paul, and really one of the smartest and most visionary energy leaders that we have in Minnesota. So thank you so much for being with us today.
I am not sure she got the right Ken Smith, but that's okay. Thank you for the introduction. So it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Imre Gyuk. Hopefully got it close. Director of Energy Storage Research at the U.S. Department of Energy, where he has managed the research program for the past 12 years. After getting a BS at Fordham University, he did graduate work at Brown on superconductivity, received a PhD in theoretical particle physics from Purdue, and then was an assistant professor at Syracuse, where he taught, at the University of Wisconsin, where he taught physics, civil engineering, environmental architecture. He has also taught at the Department of Physics in Kuwait University, where he became interested in sustainability. As I said, for the past 12 years, he's directed the electrical energy storage research program at the Office of Electricity, developing a wide portfolio of storage technologies for a broad spectrum of applications. And he has supervised a number of grid-scale demonstration projects and is now partnering with states on storage projects for grid resilience. He has won numerous awards. He's an internationally recognized leader in this space. Please help me welcome Dr. Gyuk.
Well, as the afternoon is slowly drawing to a close, it's nice to have one of the last keynotes, in fact, the last keynotes. And, well, first of all, I want to give you my Midwestern credentials. I have my PhD from Purdue in Indiana. I have taught at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I have wonderful memories of many days of canoeing and hiking in the Boundary Water Wilderness area. So it's nice to be here on an academic note for a change. So I'm going to be talking about energy storage, particularly grid-scale energy storage. Now, when I started this program some 13 years ago or so, energy storage was a completely unknown field to the utilities. Of course, there was pumped hydro, which was developed jointly with nuclear power plants. But the idea of using batteries, or anything else for that matter, in a utility grid was alien to most utilities, and their eyes would glaze over, and they would say, well, why do you want to do that? After 13 years of hard work, we and a good number of other people have finally gotten to the point where energy storage is not only an unknown, but it is in fact one of the hottest topics in the electricity business. And by the way, who swiped the clicker?
Where's my clicker?
Assuming it works.
All right, here we go.
These little organizational details. To the right forwards. Top.
No, oh, wait, this one, this side? Oops, it just went.
There we are.
Yes.
Okay.
Good luck.
So the idea of storage is actually fairly simple. Energy storage provides energy when it is needed, just as transmission provides energy where it is needed. It's a very pleasing symmetry of time and space. But the where it is needed is something that we've been working for the last 100 years. And of course, the energy, the electricity grid of the United States, and for that matter of Europe or of the Far East and Australia, are true marvels of technology. But energy storage is quite new. We are at the beginning of it, and we hope that it will end up as a marvel of technology as well. My thumb is not as effective. There we are. So why are we doing energy storage just now? We could have done it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but why do we want to do it right now? Well, the reason is because the grid has become, well, I won't say unmanageable, but certainly a lot more complex. And from being a deterministic grid where you have generation and load and transmission in between, it has now become stochastic. The various parts of the grid are variable. It's no longer just a fossil fuel plant, which you can rev up a little bit or rev down a little bit. You have a lot of wind, you have solar PV, and these are inherently variable. The load side has become more complex too. We no longer just have, predictable, day and night load distribution. We are now beginning to introduce electric vehicles. We have a lot of rooftop PV coming in, and we have a lot more power electronics than we used to have in buildings. So what we need to handle this grid where we have a variable load and the variable generation is a buffer, and that buffer is storage. A few words about storage economics. Now, of course, you've heard about this all day long, basically, but here it is again. The important thing is to distinguish between cost and value. Those are different, very different, but ultimately they have to balance out, okay, if you have a system that works sustainably. The cost of a storage system depends on the storage device, first of all, let's say the battery, but it could be something else. But then there is also the power electronics, equally important. And finally, something that I call the facility or the balance of plant. And they have sizable proportion of what the cost is going to end up. And it's not enough to just say, well, we are going to have cheaper batteries, because we also need cheaper power electronics, and we have to reduce the cost of balance of plant. Now, we know roughly what we mean by energy, by the device and by the power electronics. We want to go to wide bandgap power electronics. But what about this balance of plant thing? Well, it's very interesting. You start with cells. You put them into a battery. You have to put the battery into racks. You have to put those racks into a building. And these are all different depending on your technology. Then you have to have air conditioning, depending on the battery. If you have lithium ion, you need a lot. Then you have your safety system, your sprinklers and so on. And again, that's not trivial because the chemical systems are complex things, and you can't just douse them with water. Then, of course, you have the property itself, the building and the site. You have the commissioning of the system. You have the cost of money. And you have the cost of the lawyers. Yeah, there are a few sitting around here. Anyway, they're drawn to money. Well, they have shown recently that they also have a conscience. Anyway, enough of that. But lawyers could be, the contract can be 3% of the cost of the whole system. Now, solar has streamlined all of those things. And you can pull out a fairly standard contract and just sign on the dots and so on. For storage projects, as yet, pretty much all of these things have to be done one by one. Okay, so we need to reduce the cost of all of these overhead things, the balance of plant. Now the value, again, as has been mentioned, it depends on multiple benefit streams which you are supposed to stack on top of each other. But we have to consider both the monetized and the unmonetized ones. Now, in the examples that I will give you shortly, among the benefit streams, there is arbitrage, the most obvious one, buy low, sell high, but not one of the best ones. Frequency regulation, which is one of the most assured ones. But again, it's a limited market. Then is demand charge reduction. And demand charges come both by the month and by the year. That turns out to be a very fruitful area if your region allows that kind of thing. And then come the unmonetized ones, like resiliency. And the interesting thing is that many facilities are built not immediately because you can make a profit, but because of those unmonetized benefits. You know, aftermath of a hurricane, military reservations where they need the energy. You know, these unmonetized or difficult to monetize benefit streams are often the thing that decides people that they want storage. Now I'm going to go fairly quickly about this because we only have 20 minutes, but we introduced frequency regulation, literally sitting in a room with a bunch of utility people, ISO people, and vendors, and we decided that, hey, the first utility application that's going to work is going to be frequency regulation, because it's fairly inefficient if you do that with fossil fuels, revving it up and down. So we said this will work. We are going to try it, and you know, we'll do an example, because nobody is convinced by analysis. People are convinced by examples. So we built one, and the first technology that we did it with was flywheels. You can see them up on top. The little blue things are flywheels. The white things are the power electronics. We commissioned that in 2014. And we recently after we did this, did the calculation, and you know, it makes good revenue. Obviously, you can do this with batteries just as well, and we had another project where we did it with batteries. And this, FERC got itself convinced by this, because FERC only reacts if they actually have something in front of them. And they established pay for performance, and ever since, frequency regulation using energy storage has become a commercially viable business in FERC-compliant regions. It was the first commercially viable storage business. Okay, then we did other examples. For example, we did several things in California, among them at Tehachapi, an 8 megawatt, 32 megawatt hour storage plant, together with Southern California Edison. LG Chem did the battery. These were the first plants of any size in California, and they were essentially what enabled California, or what gave them the courage to eventually set a target of 1.3 gigawatt of storage by 2020. Not going to talk about the duck curve, even though it's the first time we see it today, but you may have seen it in other places. Okay, so what do I do nowadays? I don't do big projects anymore because we don't have big money anymore, and also because essentially the technology has proven out. You know, it's no longer unknown. There are commercially viable cases out there. You know we can do this sort of thing. So now I like to work on resiliency, and I like to work closely with the states and municipalities. If you look at the diagram, let's see, is that what does this do? Well, whatever. You look at the diagram in the upper right-hand corner, that is the average temperature in Washington, D.C. And as you can see, there's a very clear trend there. And these are real measured temperatures. It's not just hot air on the hill. That translates into money. The lower graph has the number of natural disasters that had damages in the billion-dollar range. And there, too, you can see a trend. In fact, the trend indicates the situation will get worse, not better. So what can we do? Well, a rule of thumb says that for every dollar spent on protection measures, that should be measures, not measurements, can prevent $4 in repairs after a storm. This goes, all across building levees or what have you. So do something beforehand. And in fact, we did, and you get a chance to see Mary Powell again. Our project in Vermont, we got together with the Vermont Public Service Department, and we did a solicitation, and Green Mountain Power picked it up. And we did that project in Rutland, of which you saw a few slides earlier on. And what we did there is 4 megawatts of storage integrated with 2 megawatts of PV. You can see the picture there of the finished thing. The little white things in the distance are the storage. The groundbreaking, which you see up there with Mary, the then governor of Vermont, and myself, was in 2014, and the commissioning was about a year and a half later in 2015. So you can build these things fast. Now, why is this remarkable? Because this is built as an emergency shelter. The system can be islanded to provide emergency power for a resilient microgrid serving a high school emergency center. People can go in there, and we can maintain mission-critical services over long periods of time. But of course, most of the time, it's not an emergency. So the system opens up. The storage provides ancillary grid services, demand charge reduction, and the PV has green power for the grid. And this had good echoes, and we are beginning to work on other projects like the Burlington Airport. This is how it works. The demand charges, the monthly ones, are payments for using the transmission lines, and the yearly ones, which are paid to the ISO, are capacity reserves. Now, they designate a particular day and hour at which is going to count, and the utility has to pay depending on what they did during that day. Well, what we did was, during that particular hour, we let loose the storage and a little bit of the solar. Of course, you have to make sure that your storage is charged up. And capturing this yearly peak meant an avoidance of $200,000 in charges for the utility. So it's an immediate return on money. The result is there is a real payback for the entire system, not the solar, but for the storage system, of about 6 years by capturing the yearly and the monthly charges. Here's another project which was built using the experience we had gained in Vermont. This is in Sterling, Massachusetts, on October 2016. This bunch of people got together on this, on a transmission at a transmission facility, and started digging. And 3 months later, we had a full-scale storage facility in place, 2 megawatts, using a grant from the Massachusetts Community Clean Energy Resiliency Initiative, a bit from the Department of Energy through Sandia. But the main thing is we provided the expertise of our national labs and the calculations and the analytics that we had worked out for Rutland. So the analysis tells us that from arbitrage, reduced monthly peaks, reduced yearly peaks, and frequency regulation, we can get those amounts per megawatt hour of storage for a total of about $300,000 a year. And of course, they're 2 megawatts, so it's twice as much. And again, the capital cost was $1.7 million per megawatt. The simple payback is 6.7 years. The thing pays for itself. And we captured the monthly peak in December, February, March, April, May, June, happened to be the annual peak, and July. And this is what it looks like. You see that dip in there. That dip is when they discharged the storage unit. It meant a profit of roughly $17,000. Adds up to $200,000 per year for this $6.7 million payback. Okay, because we can't do this for every single municipality, and there were 11 that were interested in this, we wrote a manual which is basically an energy storage procurement guidance document for municipalities. So, you know, holding their hand saying this is how you do it. Because they had received these grants from the state of Massachusetts, and then they said, well, what do we do now? Okay, it's in many ways easier to get money than to spend it meaningfully. And gratifyingly, we received the GTM Grid Edge Award for this. Here's another project which I will not go into, except this one uses vanadium redox technology, which was developed at P&L but is now licensed. Again, the ribbon cutting, again, the governor, again, myself. And we did the analytics there. We also basically invented the technology where we brought the cost of the technology from $600 per kilowatt hour to $300 per kilowatt hour. But again, that's cost. Next week, I'm going to be down in Chattanooga with a new project, again, a vanadium redox battery project. And we have a lot of those others in the pipeline: Birmingham, Eugene, Cordova, Alaska, Northampton, Kona, Hawaii, Orcas Island, Portland, Oregon. You know, these are all states that are interested, like Minnesota, in deploying storage and incorporating storage in their grid. Now, very, very quickly, the bigger picture. We work with regulatory commissions and PUCs. We did a meeting with the Northwest PUC, another one with the Southwest PUC, and these are very important because for the PUCs, this is new too. They have to know how to deal with this. We run regular webinars through the Energy Storage Technology Advanced Partnership. These are free for everyone, and you can. They're archived, so you can find them on the net. We maintain the International Energy Storage Database, which now has over 1,500 energy storage projects on it. This is the overall picture, and notice that the predictions are that we're going to go up and up in both residential, non-residential, and utility storage. It also means jobs, and these are real jobs from a real employment report by DOE. Notice that pumped hydro battery storage and other storage, which is thermal, are about 10% of the total employment figures for transmission and distribution workers in general. So here we are. With new technologies, cost will go down, safety and reliability will increase. With every successful project, the value proposition will continue to increase and more jobs will be created. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gyuk. And if I could have Sarah and Lynn join us as well. I'm pleased to introduce the other two panelists, and they're going to have comments for us as well. I would encourage you, if you have questions, please be jotting them down now, and so that we can get them to the front and get as many as we can into the question and answer session. So first I want to introduce Sarah Van Cleve. She's the Energy Policy Director or Advisor with Tesla. She manages the energy storage policy development, collaborating with regulators, legislators on policies affecting the development of energy storage in the United States markets. She leads policy on various electricity industry issues, including resource procurement, integrated resource planning, and wholesale market to design. Prior to coming to Tesla, she managed the energy storage policy at Southern California Edison, where she helped guide the utility's groundbreaking procurement of 264 megawatts of energy storage. She's started her career as a financial analyst in electricity, emissions work in operations, trading, and market design, and she holds a BA in economics from UCLA. Please welcome Sarah. And I also want to introduce Lynn Franks. She's the Senior Strategist, RTO, FERC, and Compliance Initiatives at Indianapolis Power and Light Company. And she works towards the creation of appropriate FERC and RTO tariff and business practice rules to incent interconnection of batteries with the grid. She is a senior strategist with IP&L. It's an IES company, and part of that she engaged with the MISO stakeholder process and represents IPL for market, reliability, and transmission issues. For the past 3 years, she's worked toward the creation of appropriate FERC and RTO tariff and business practice rules to incent interconnection of batteries with the grid. And she spearheaded the integration of the first lithium-ion battery, IPL's Harding Street BESS, into MISO. She also coordinates the drafting of submittal of comments to FERC for all U.S. AES entities, and many more things. Please welcome Lynn as well.
Great, good afternoon, everyone. As Ken said, I'm at Tesla managing our energy storage policy, and so I've been seeing the industry from the technology and developer side for the last few years, but before that I was at Edison, so Southern California Edison that is, so I saw the energy storage industry from the utility side as well. So both of those experiences inform my comments today, which I have to say, standard disclaimer, are comments of my own and not necessarily those of Tesla. So today I'm going to focus mostly on projects. You've heard a lot about what storage can do, so I want to talk about some real commercial deployments and noting commercial there, because we really are past pilot deployments, at least on the technology side. I understand some utilities want to pilot how it works with their system or different programs, but the technology itself is fully commercially available. So with that, I will jump in here. So you've probably heard about Tesla because of our vehicles, but hopefully I can convince you that our energy storage systems are pretty cool too. So on the left there is, of course, the chassis of our vehicle, which is an energy storage system itself, but not a stationary storage system, which I'd like to focus on a little more today. So in the middle is our residential storage system, which we call the Powerwall. That is a 5 kilowatt, 13.5 kilowatt hour residential system. You'll note when I talk about these projects, I always say both the power rating and the energy rating. So power in kilowatts and megawatts, and energy in kilowatt hours or megawatt hours. And I think that's really important for a fundamental understanding of energy storage technology, because both of those measurements play into what the storage device can do for the system. So moving to the right there is our commercial energy storage system. It's about the size of a big refrigerator when you see it in person, but they're 200 kilowatt hour unit blocks that can be stacked up. So you can have one or two for a small commercial building, or stack up hundreds or even thousands for utility scale projects. So this is the short list of some of the many things that storage can do. You've heard all of these today. But I will agree with a number of the earlier presenters that really focused on reducing peak. I wish I had this stat from Minnesota, but I heard a stat recently from Massachusetts where they said that they spend 40% of their electricity costs on the top 10% of hours. So that really shows the opportunity to reduce peak spend on whether it's distribution to meet peak, new transmission to meet peak, or new generation to meet peak. So I think that should really be a focus for looking at opportunities in the Midwest. All right, so into these projects here. This one you saw a different picture of earlier in a presentation, but this is our recent 20 megawatt, 80 megawatt hour, so it can push out those full 20 megawatts for 4 hours project down in Southern California, Edison Territory, that was built in response to the Aliso Canyon crisis, where the Southern California utilities suddenly needed to make sure that they could meet peak demand potentially without the use of some natural gas peakers. What I think is coolest about this project is the fact that it was built within 3 months from contract signature to online date. So if you know generation planning 3 to 7 years out, typically you have to look really far ahead to figure out where you're going to put new energy generation on the grid. But this really changes the planning horizon for new generation as well as new as transmission and distribution, which I'll get to in a little bit. All right, next is a project down in Kauai. So this is a fully firmed renewable peaker. It's solar plus storage, 13 megawatts of solar paired with a 13 megawatt, 52 megawatt hour storage system. And all of the electricity from the solar gets sent through the batteries and then delivered to the utility between 5 to 10 p.m. when they actually need electricity, because they're in Hawaii, they already have a lot of solar. They don't need solar when it's producing, they need it afterwards in the evening. Really cool project. This project was signed more than 2 years ago at this point at a cost of $145 a megawatt hour, which sounds like a lot of money for energy, but for peaking energy, that is cost competitive. So I just this morning looked up Lazard's levelized cost of energy for natural gas plants. It's between $170 and $217 a megawatt hour. And this was $145 a megawatt hour 2 years ago. Since then, AES has announced that they're going to build a similar project for $110 per megawatt hour. So you can see not only that the costs are competitive, but the costs continue to come down for these types of systems. Uh-oh, there we go. So this is a project we have down in New Zealand. It is a project that offset the need to upgrade a substation. And I wanted to bring this project up because I think that these types of projects will be economical here in the Midwest and really everywhere around the country. You don't need high electricity prices to justify a distribution deferral project because the cost of a substation in Texas and Illinois and California, it's relatively similar. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for projects like this. And the next slide emphasizes why a bit. So you can see here in this chart, the gray line shows you what a conventional distribution solution would offer. It would be looking out quite a few years ahead, 10, 20 years, at what the forecasted peak is going to do, and then you build out the solution. Basically, you build lots of capacity right now because you're forecasting that you're going to need that 10, 20, in the case of transmission, even 40 years out sometimes. What you can do instead is use energy storage incrementally, put in a little bit of energy storage every few years, and see if that load actually materializes. So one, you reduce the risk that the load doesn't materialize, which we all know has happened in the past. But two, you get to defer that relatively large capital expense that you would incur if you were putting in a traditional solution. So we are expecting and starting to see a lot more of these types of projects. Next, I wanted to make sure we hit on commercial industrial customers. We got quite a few questions about that throughout the day. This is absolutely one of our main markets, is putting in storage at small and large commercial industrial facilities to mostly help reduce their demand charge. But obviously there's other services that these projects can offer, time use rate arbitrage, backup, and hopefully we're starting to get to the point where they can also be used in utility programs. So when I was at Southern California Edison, working on our local capacity requirements, RFO, which was our big solicitation, where we were required to buy 50 megawatts of energy storage by the state, we ended up buying 264 megawatts, so 5 times what we required because it was cost effective, and that was back in 2014. What's really interesting though, and related to this slide, is that 164 megawatts of that 264 was behind the meter storage. So it was largely projects like these that were at commercial industrial facilities that were providing some services to the customers themselves, but they were also using the capacity to provide peak reduction and capacity value. And of course, you heard Mary earlier talk about the Green Mountain Power Project, where the utility there is essentially splitting the cost of power walls with their customers. So the customer gets resilience, backup power, and the utility gets to reduce their ISO New England transmission charges. A really cool project, and we are starting to see a few other utilities follow their lead and implement similar programs. So we're hoping to see even more crop up. So with my last slide here, if I can get there. Oops, one too many. All right, there we go. I wanted to respectfully disagree with what I think a majority of the group here thinks that the largest barrier to deploying energy storage is. It was clear from that chart earlier that most folks in this room think that it's cost. And I completely agree that cost is a major factor. As we see costs come down, there's just going to be more and more viable opportunities for storage. That said, there's already viable opportunities for storage everywhere. I can guarantee that, well, I don't have the data, but I'm very confident that every state in the country has opportunities for cost-effective storage. It's just a matter of uncovering those opportunities. And the way we do that is by updating grid processes and tariffs. And this list I came up with after spending 2 years at Edison trying to resolve all of the issues we didn't realize we had until we actually went to try to buy storage. We realized that our planning processes, both generation side as well as transmission distribution, weren't updated to incorporate storage. Think about how we could use storage, especially across those different types of assets. Valuation, we didn't have the models that we needed at the time. Of course, Edison has resolved much of this. We didn't have the models that we needed to compare storage to traditional resources. Procurement, our bid offer form, something as simple as the Excel sheet that we, as now on the developer side, try to fill out to bid into utility solicitations. Oftentimes, there's nowhere to put in the values that you need to put in for a utility to model how a storage device would work on their system. Operations, of course, how are the utilities going to dispatch these? They're used to having a distribution system that's pretty much static, that they don't have to manage very actively with some exceptions. Rate design, what are these storage devices going to pay when they're pulling energy off the grid and pushing it back on? And interconnection, a really big one, especially again because storage is so dynamic. It's not a static interconnection like we've seen in the past where the utility says, okay, there's enough capacity for you to push out this much generation. Instead, we need to do a little bit more smart thinking on our interconnection. Because what we ran into in the early stages was utilities saying, well, if you charge your battery during peak on the distribution system, we're actually going to have to upgrade that circuit, which obviously is the complete opposite intention of storage. We're supposed to help reduce the stress on the circuit. So figuring out how to change that interconnection and operational paradigm so that we can use these storage systems to help the grid instead of to make things worse on the grid. So a lot that needs to change, and so that's the message I really want to get out to this group, was that we need to start by updating grid processes, and I think that you'll see that the costs are already at a sufficient level that we'll get projects deployed. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to know how to use this. While they're figuring out where my presentation is, I'll start with telling you we did not put in my profile that I am an engineer. I guess I'm a recovering engineer. I'm trying to talk to real people now, so we'll see how I do. There is a 12-step process. I agree totally with what Sarah said. I was shocked, quite frankly, by that bar that said that cost was the biggest problem. And it reminded me immediately of a few years ago when we had a new general counsel who was reviewing the legal bills. And I do spend a lot of time at FERC and stirring up the pot, if you will, in that area. And he was looking at a bill, and it was about $600,000 for one case I was working on. And he was very angry, and he called me in there and you know, reamed me one way and the other. And then he said, "What is your justification for this bill?" And I said, "We won, and we saved the customers $22 million for something they didn't need." That's what we have to think about when we look at these sticker shocks, when we see the numbers on batteries. I grew up with manual screwdrivers. I'm fairly old, and I still have all of my original collection of manual screwdrivers. To me, those are the synchronous generators. We still love them. And we got real excited along the way when they gave us screwdrivers that you could interchange the tips on them. That was pretty cool, too. Along came power screwdrivers with lithium-ion batteries attached to them. And I looked at it and went, "Oh my God, why do I need one of these? These all work really well." And then I built a deck. And for those of you who don't know, there's thousands of screws you have to put into a deck, all with predetermined locations, and it's very repetitive and it wears you out. And I went to Home Depot pretty fast. I now have several, by the way. This is a new kind of thinking that we have to do. So I want to paint a picture. That's a picture of our battery. It is a 20 megawatt lithium-ion technology array. We designed it to provide primary frequency response. And it's been doing that autonomously since May 20th without a blip. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, I have to do that, don't I? Does anybody know which button I push? The right one?
You do the.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So IPL is like your old, staid-looking traditional utility. And I see people taking lovely little pictures. I understand that all the slides are going to be on the website later. Plus, I'm happy to share anything you want. So we're basically a fairly small IOU. We circle around Indianapolis and have a little bit of territory outside of that. And you can see where our retail customers are. A few years ago, when we were trying to decide how to address a few disruptive events in our life, we had the MATS, the mercury air toxin standard thing to deal with. And to do that, we were converting almost all of our coal generators to operate on natural gas. And we also had, at the same time, or around the same time, we put out a feed-in tariff for solar. Naively thinking, oh, not that many people are going to want to do it. And very quickly, we had over 200 megawatts of various size projects that wanted to interconnect immediately to our system. We today have 100 megawatts of customer-owned solar. And that process of incorporating those into our distribution system gave us a glimpse into the future that everybody's going to have to deal with distributed generation. Like everybody else, you study how it's going to interconnect with all of the tools you've always used. You plug those suckers in, and they do something exactly opposite from what you thought. And they do it very quickly. So what we realized at that point in time is, of course, we need to put in more protection systems, but we also need tools to mitigate the essential reliability services of voltage and frequency control as fast as these events occur, and that's instantaneous. Synchronous generation cannot do that. So we were faced with going through that conversion of those units to meet the absolute deadlines of the MATS. We were faced with several of our generators that we used to supply those essential reliability services being offline for the conversion or offline for a safety reason as we were building some transmission on the site. So we went, we can't meet this deadline and maintain reliability if we don't have other ways to have frequency and voltage control. So we ended up building a 300 megavar static var compensator. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a wonderful device that automatically reads system voltage and automatically controls it the way it needs to be controlled. It is autonomous, it's beautiful. And for the frequency control issue, we had all kinds of options to look at. Now, from history, you would say, okay, I can upgrade the governors that are on my synchronous generators. I can maybe put in some capacitor banks. Those are all pretty much one-trick ponies. And we knew the future was different because we saw what happened with our distributed generation, and we knew we needed different ways to manage systems going forward. And we went down the litany of everything you can look at, and we decided, well, we kind of like the thought of an iPhone. And this goes to valuing these things. When I bought my first iPhone, it was a ridiculous price, but now it's even worse, right? And I was, skeptical. I thought, okay, I'm going to use it for telephones, telephone calls, and it's mobile, so that's a benefit that I don't have with my landline. Might use it for email. I don't think I use it much for either one of those things today. I can level a picture. I can use it as a level, a plumb bob. I can open my garage door. I can do any number of things. If I can think of it, I can do it on my phone, right? Do we all love apps? So we wanted for our customers not to have to pay for a one-trick pony. We knew the system was changing, but we didn't know to what magnitude and where. So we also needed something that could add value as we learned how to use it, so that's our iPhone, but we also wanted something that could morph with the changes in the industry without asking our customers to go back to the well. So what we have, oh, I guess I'm the control of this, aren't I? Not very well. There we go. What we built was a 20 megawatt lithium-ion battery array. It's flexible 40, so if you're thinking about frequency control, it injects when the system frequency is too low, and it withdraws when the system frequency is too high. That simple. It does it really, really fast, and it does it really efficiently. In the MISO footprint, where you have mostly synchronous generators with governors on them providing all kinds of frequency control, they do it at an EAF of about 60%. A lot of that has to do with availability and when you're actually dispatched. The battery's there, it's continuously on, continuously charged, and continuously providing service. It's kind of like those LED bulbs you put into your house that have a 25-year life. You put them up there, you don't even think about them for 25 years, but if you keep flipping them on and off, you're burning up some of their life by doing that, and they don't last as long. But if you leave them alone and let them be autonomously providing this is what they're designed to do, they're going to last a long time. So that's what our guy is doing, and the only reason it's not 100% is you have to take the devices down for safety reasons to test that you know how to do it. So we would be 100% EAF. You have nothing else on the system that can do that, nothing. It can go from a neutral state to full injection or withdrawal, whatever we tell it to do in the software, in less than 1 second. That is like putting a light switch on. We did test, just for fun, all the criteria for every ancillary service that is in the MISO tariff today to see how it would perform under that criteria, and it blew them all out of the water. This, I said, is a transmission asset for us. That was a little bit different. There were a couple out there, Presidios out there as a transmission asset. But for the MISO footprint, nothing had happened like that. And for FERC, it was a challenge. Because at that point in time, we wanted to seek a revenue stream, because we're going to ask our customers to pay for this. Haven't done it yet, but we will. And if we got revenue from it, rightfully that revenue would go back to our customers. So always charging down, whatever benefit we can give to the customers. So we wanted to do that with this one. It turns out that there's, remember I told you about the 25-year life on the light bulb. If I were to put it into MISO's market mechanism, it would reduce the life of the cells that we used in this battery from a 10-year estimate of life to 3 years, because it burns up its cycle life. So we didn't want to do that. We're still working on the rules. We're still working on how to do that going forward. But more importantly, it's part of our grid resiliency plan. We know we've got all of this distributed generation coming on. You can't stop it. You may as well join the game. And we need to have a system that can handle those thousands more data points that exist. So we need more things like batteries that can instantly react without human intervention to the deviations. And to us, that's a huge value. We've talked about some of the things that people are talking about analyzing that these batteries can do. Frequency control is one of those things. But we didn't talk specifically on frequency control because it's a time continuum that NERC has. At the same time we were going through our feed-in tariff and our MATS issues, NERC was working on probably the scariest standard they have out there, and it has to do with primary frequency control. They have since put it into effect, but it will change over time. And the BAs have the responsibility, or the balancing authorities have the responsibility for that. How that gets handled in each of the balancing authorities may be different, but it's likely that in the MISO footprint, that formula that NERC used to allocate a quantity of responsibility to MISO will be allocated down perhaps to the local balancing authorities. So you have the ability then to use your pool of resources to meet whatever your requirements are. So if you've got a nuclear facility that probably not good to put a governor type situation on, then you can procure that or use some of the other units in your portfolio to meet your obligation. So that way, that's probably the way it'll come down. Somebody talked about recycling these things. I want to chat about that a minute. We do analyze the value of these for regulatory purposes at having, well, right now, a 10-year life, and you go out to 20 years, and then you replace them at a 10-year mark, but that's not really the way it works. You don't replace them all at one time. And they just happen. And given that this is a big Lego set, somebody comes out with a better battery pack, it's plug and play for me. I don't interrupt service at all. I just go in there and plug in new battery packs. So I don't know what the life of this is. It's more like life of the transmission grid. You know, you just keep upgrading it and replacing parts, and it just goes on forever. These may be similar to that. This is basically our number. It's not really important to our discussion, but we have 8 2.5 megawatt cores. Each of those cores have at least 30 what you call nodes. That's just a rack of battery packs and inverters and control systems. And we end up having, this is just for the Trivial Pursuit game later. We have in our facility 97,600 cells. So that's a lot of stuff. Come on. And that's what she looks like from the outside. It's a big cement block building with hideous colors, but they happen to be the company colors. That green looks subdued in here. It is really fluorescent. And in our building, in our headquarters downtown, we actually have entire rooms, including the ceiling, that are painted with that green. I can't even walk into them. Come on, move. That's kind of what it looks like on the inside. This is the important stuff. I brought some performance charts. Let me see, I forgot what day this is. This is June 6th. It's a 24-hour period from June 6th to June 7th. And it's a little exaggerated. The bars, by the way, are 2-second bars. So the system reads the system frequency. The array reads the system frequency every 2 seconds. And it responds according to how we have the software programmed. Right now we have it set with the Eastern Interconnection guidelines by NERC for primary frequency control by synchronous generators. So it's got the same deadband so that everybody responds at the same deadband of deviation. And it also has the slope that you use for synchronous generation. That slope, for those of you who may not know, is basically there so that you don't tell the generators to give all their capacity to the problem. They just give their fair share along a slope, and they can still do energy for the market with the rest of it, which begs a question. So anytime you see a long line going up above those little ones in the middle, that is the system stop. I'm about done. Okay, so that's the system responding when the system frequency is too low. And anyone in the bottom is it's withdrawing because system frequency is too high. The ones in the middle, that's our parasitic load. And that is consistently about 500 kW in a 24-hour period. Very low. And what is the parasitic load? It's our lights, of course, any losses, but they're de minimis. But most importantly, it's managing the state of charge for the service we're performing. That's all it is. It's a small number. One more example, maybe. A weird day, this was July 4th, where system frequency was continuously too low for the entire period. I hadn't seen one of those before. The only time I would see my battery go to 20 megawatts is when a nearby generator would trip. I think I'm done. I am. I have a bunch of other stuff on the back of this when you get the presentation off of the website that you might be interested in, and do not hesitate to call me if you have questions.
Well, thank you. That was really great. We're actually out of time. I'm so sorry. That was a lot of good information and content. Are you all going to be around for a few minutes? So everybody who has questions, I think you're going to have to come up and talk to them. We do have a break scheduled. I think everybody needs one last break, so you can be bright-eyed for the very last wrap-up session. So we're going to take a quick break and be back by 3:15. Thank you so much.
Oh, I have questions for you.